So if you look at it that way, then in addition to these gentlemen being given a sight, we can also have our eyes symbolically opened to God's message when we accept Jesus and study his word and are baptized and become disciples and become grounded in faith and continue to study and learn. So in a sense, you've gone from blind to seeing when that happens. And we also face opposition. People don't often come to you and say, I want you to reject Jesus. It's not that blatant. But you can be encouraged in other directions. People will say, oh, we need to be doing this or that. Let's go play golf today. Let's do this. Let's go to a concert. Let's go to the beach. Or I need to work on making my living, and I just don't have time for this. I'm not against Jesus, but I don't have time for it, that kind of thing. So, all sorts of things can be thrown in your path. And the thing that I get out of this section is that regardless of that, God will always recognize us and will answer us when we accept Jesus for who he was and commit to following him. So it's pretty straightforward in this passage.
Mark, that's consistent with the seeking to find knocking to be open.
Right.
The point that you're making. And there's sort of a flip side of that in a way, which is that Jesus modeled, if you please, compassion for us to follow too.
Right.
To be another thought that we are. We're to be his disciples, we are to be like him, and compassion would be
one of the things that you would have to learn. Mm-hmm. Okay, Mona, you up to reading? You want to read the next section, Luke 19, 1 to 10?
So he ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him. He was going past that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and saw him and said to him, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I must stay at your house. So he made haste and came down and received him joyfully. But when they saw it, they all complained, saying, He has gone to be a guest with a man who is a sinner. Then Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Look, Lord, I give half of my goods to the poor, and if I have taken anything from anyone by false accusation, I restore fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, because he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost.
Okay, thank you. All right, there's a number of lessons we can get out of this passage. I see at least 4 of them. The first one is the power of seeking. Zacchaeus was anxious to see this Jesus that he had heard about and to have an interaction with him, see him up close, see if all that he heard was so. And Jesus was not living in Jericho. He was passing through on his way to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. And it doesn't tell us an awful lot about Zacchaeus. It just says he was a man named Zacchaeus who was a chief tax collector and he was rich. But that does tell you something, because basically he was a government employee. And put it in today's terms, government employees make a decent living, and a chief tax collector, I guess, would be like the head of the IRS or something, making a couple $100,000 a year. But you don't get rich doing that unless you're abusing somehow or engaged in criminal activity, crooked activity. Think about some of our senators and congressmen. We'll be nice and not name names. But one lady that went in, she and her husband were worth about $200,000, and now they're worth over $200 million. And yet the salary is a little short of $200,000. Another guy that's been there his entire life has worked for the government. He's up at $85 million. And a young congresswoman that came in worth about $20,000 is now worth over $10 million in just a matter of about 4 years. So you have to wonder, how do these people get rich? So the implication here is that, number one, tax collectors were pretty frowned upon in these times. Even an honest tax collector who just came to you and said, okay, Jim, you made X number of denarii last year and you need to pay us 10%, 15%, whatever the tax is. And then he puts it into the treasury for the government. He's not going to get rich. He's going to be comfortable. He's not going to be a poverty-stricken fellow, but he's not going to be rich. So most of the tax collectors that were rich were crooked. He was really not emphatic. He was really intense about wanting to see Jesus. You know, the crowd, everybody was taller than him. He couldn't see over them. Well, that didn't stop him. He didn't say, well, I'm a dignified, tax collector. I'm going to work my way to the front. He climbed up in a sycamore tree and saw what he could see. So it tells you that, one of the things we learn here is the power of seeking, that even if you have an impediment, if you're determined to find out about God, you will find out about God, or to find out about Jesus. And it doesn't have to be that you're short. It doesn't have to be a physical impediment, but almost everybody has some sort of impediment. It may be that they're painfully shy. It may be that they're so concerned with taking care of their family and making a living that they just don't, that takes priority for them. But regardless of the fact that he recognized that he had an impediment of some sort, it didn't stop him. He overcame his obstacle. Yes. What verse are you in? Where it says, 8. Okay. I think he did, and most scholars think he did. Well, I don't think it was that he was unsure if he had or not. I don't think he was really saying that, I wonder if I did this. I think he was saying, if it turns out that you're one of the ones that I stole from. That's the way I've always interpreted it. Now you may be right and I may be wrong, but that's the way I've always taken it, that he's saying, whoever can show that I cheated them or stole from them, I will make restitution to that person. So that's how I view the if. But he didn't seem like the absolute ideal candidate to be following Jesus. A lot of people would say, the poor people, the downtrodden, they would want to follow Jesus. But every time I read this passage, I think of Gary Palmer, our congressman. I went to church with him for 13 and a half years. And some of the people at church used to make fun of him because they would go to Phillips High School 2 nights a week, and they would do Bible studies, and they would hand out food, and they would do all the things they could to reach out to these poor people in Birmingham. Well, Gary had his mission to Mountain Brook. And people gave him so much trouble about that. And they said, well, that's terrible. I mean, those people are rich, they're wealthy, they're all comfortable. They don't need you. These poor people in town need you. Well, there were maybe 25 people that participated in that ministry in town with the poor people. Gary was the only one heading up a ministry to Mountain Brook, and he would do a study once a week at Mountain Brook High School. And he would go out and invite people, and he'd tell them, you need to come to our church, and you need to. And he said, you know, rich people need saved too. He said, as a matter of fact, they're harder to save sometimes because they're comfortable and they think that I've got a good life and everything is fine for me and I don't need religion. You know, I don't need God. I'm doing good. And a lot of people made fun of him, but I understood what he was saying. And I think he was right. It didn't negate any of the other. It didn't say that the other was not a good and worthy outreach program. But I dare say there's probably a lot of churches that just reach out to people they view as downtrodden and don't think about people that in the world's eyes are leading the good life. And they need saved too.
Amen. Yeah, Mom and I visited church in the General Metro area here when we first came here, and one of the elders on Wednesday night who came said there, and he's talking about a particular neighborhood with more expensive homes for the time, and he said there is no point in going to that neighborhood because they're not going to be interested in the gospel of Christ. Well, that was extremely off-putting to the two of us, for sure. I mean, not that we necessarily would have chosen that place to go to, but, you know, that's just the gospel's for everybody. And you know, people's lives, I mean, Jesus in the great invitation that we speak of in Matthew 11, come to me, all you that labor, all you that have problems and are burdened with something.
Right.
Give you rest. And there's a lot of wealthy people that have a lot of problems in their lives.
Well,
Need relief from them. So,
well, whoever you choose to go and reach out to, I mean, it's fine for them to reach out to poor people, downtrodden people, middle-class people, but to exclude a group, and there were two elders, they had about 8 elders at the time. There were 2 that used to try and discourage Gary. They'd say, you're wasting your time. It could be better spent out here at Phillips High School these 2 nights a week, you know, in our outreach program. And I thought, they're both valuable. I mean, should be, because you're supposed to reach out to everybody. Right. That's absolutely true.
Sometimes people forget that Abraham was a very rich man.
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, it's nice to have some folks with money in the church to
Yeah, help finance those outreaches to the less fortunate. Yeah. But I think, you know, it's probably beyond argumentation that Zacchaeus was not your typical person that was responding to Jesus' message. A lot of these wealthy people probably just totally ignored him and thought he was some kind of rabble-rouser. And anyway, another situation with a tax collector. Well, that was one of them, yes. And he had apparently over the years not had a right heart. That was a major shortcoming. But another thing that we learn from this lesson is the transforming power of grace. Jesus accepted and extended love to Zacchaeus. Normally, people were taught in those days that hospitality was an important thing and that you were supposed to reach out and be hospitable to people. But a traveler coming through the city did not normally invite himself to your house. He waited until somebody invited him. And Jesus said, I'm coming to your house. And Zacchaeus was excited and ran and got everything ready. And basically, it showed him that acceptance and love caused him to turn to repentance and a transformative change in his heart, a commitment to make amendments for his past misdeeds. Right. That's called being married. Right. Well, that's kind of, that's the way I was looking at it too. I doubt that if he had been a tax collector for many years, and he was chief tax collector, so probably he had been in that business for a lot of years, I'm sure he didn't remember every single person. Even if he knew that he had been dishonest, he didn't remember every single person. So again, I think it's what he was getting at was, if it turns out that you're one of the ones that I did something to or treated in a bad manner, I want to do better.
Well, he was willing to bring forth the fruits that met the criteria for repentance. That's one way that I see it.
Right.
He's not honored unless they have Christ saying, I'm going to your house.
Yep. And in addition to calling him at the beginning, calling him the Son of Man, he also called him Lord, Lord further on. So he was pretty well convinced. And he says, today salvation has come to this house because he also is a son of Abraham. That shows the transformative power of Christ, that no matter what your background is, you too can become a son of Abraham, metaphorically speaking. Okay, time's getting away, and we got one more to go. Chuck, you mind reading the last Luke 10:25 to 37? Thank you. Okay, this lawyer, he wasn't 100% sincere. It says he was testing Jesus. And basically, he was somewhat suspicious of Jesus. He wasn't sure that he believed that he really was the Messiah and so forth and so on. So he decided he was going to test him. And Jesus asked him, the question, and he answered correctly that he's supposed to love God and love your neighbor. And he's thinking, well, okay, I did the right thing there, and Jesus agreed with me. Then he decided he wanted to justify himself, as it says in the passage here. So, okay, I'm supposed to love my neighbor, but who is my neighbor? He's thinking there may be a catch there. And basically, to paraphrase, he's told our neighbor is anyone who needs help from us, regardless of their background or our perception of them. It's interesting, the part about this fellow that ended up helping the injured individual was a Samaritan. When Solomon's son Rehoboam became king, there was some additional battles and so forth happened, without going into it too much, with the Assyrians, and they started having the problem again where there was a lot of intermarriage between Israelites and Assyrians, and their descendants were the Samaritans. And putting it in like 19th century terms in America, they were looked down on. They were viewed as half-breeds and people that you just didn't associate with at all. And you've got the guy who's injured on the side of the road, and who comes along first? A priest and a Levite. So these are people that have an image of being religious people. And what did each one of them do? They made sure they were on the other side of the road and kept walking. And this lesson, I think, the lesson here has several messages for us. First of all, we should show compassion and act with kindness toward all people, even those who we consider different, or those whom we consider, I don't know if out and out enemies would be the word, but at least people that you don't normally associate with. And it was just considered shameful to associate with Samaritans. But true love is demonstrated by actions, not words, and that's reflected here. The Good Samaritan's actions, not his identity, made him a good neighbor. Now, if you look at verses 33 to 35, it's interesting how many action verbs are in there. It says, he saw him, he had compassion, he went to him, he bandaged his wounds, he poured on oil and wine, he set him on his own animal, he brought him to an inn, he took care of him, he took out money and gave it to the innkeeper. That's a lot of actions. He had a physical presence. Instead of walking by on the other side of the road, he came over to see if he could help the individual. He showed empathy and sympathy. He gave him medical care. The oil and wine was, medical care for that time. He gave him transportation off the road into a place of shelter, put him in the shelter, took care of him, provided financial aid. There's other places in the Bible, and we don't really have time to get into a lot of readings, but where we're told that you don't just say, go and be healed or go and be fed. You actually help people. You do something for them. It's the action that's important. So this illustrates that a person can be outwardly religious but cold and indifferent. The Levite and the priest if you ask most people, they say, oh yes, they're religious men, good men. They're, involved with their temple and so on and so forth and very active. But who was really the compassionate person and who were the cold and indifferent people here? And that's something we need to think about today. Just because somebody goes to church and on the surface appears to be a good person doesn't necessarily mean that they're compassionate as they should be when circumstances present themselves to them, such as this fellow. This guy needed help. And do we just say, well, I'll say a prayer for him and just walk on, or do we actually put our thoughts into actions and really do something to help this person that needs help? So when we were dead, in our trespasses and sins and separated from God, Jesus reached out to us in the same way the Samaritan reached out to this individual who needed help. And we may not have realized that we needed help, but Jesus reached out to us. God provided us with his scripture and so forth so that we would know what we need. And even though we were separated from him, we're still valuable to him. And that's pretty much what I got out of the lesson.
On your last point there, we got the wonderful parable of the prodigal son. Is the father there is our heavenly Father looking down the road. I mean, that's
Right.
go back to underscore your point. And I think that on this point, a denarii was a day's wages. So that's quite a bit of money. And money is a separator. I mean, you can have a lot of it or a little bit of it, but a lot of people, that's where they end being the good neighbor, right, or whatever, or being the good church member, whatever, is when it comes to releasing some money, that's
And he was given a significant amount of money because he gave 2 days' wages, and then he said, and I'll be coming back through here, and if you have had to spend additional money, maybe on a physician, on food, or on whatever, I'll give you more.
he left it open-ended.
And that's, definitely showed the compassion that he had. And, if you think about it, who had more reason to just walk on by? Because Samaritans were treated pretty badly. And they were just something, I won't say subhuman, but the next thing to it. And that could have made him bitter and say, well, they treat me terrible because I'm a Samaritan. Why should I bother with any of these people? But instead, he said, this is a person who needs help. And I feel empathy, I feel sympathy, and I'm going to help him. And he did help him. And all those action verbs, I mean, it's interesting. I think there's 11 of them just right in a row of things that he did. And I guess the lesson we can get from that is when we look into our own hearts, you can't help everybody. It's just impossible. But when you're faced with a situation that's right under your nose, do you at least do what you can do? And I think most of the people here are pretty generous in that regard. But it's something we need to constantly ask ourselves. Well, thank you for your attention, and I guess we'll see you in 15 more minutes then. It's either usually on that first pew or else under the communion table.